Welcome back, Lexie Hull. Welcome back, Lexie Hull. It's about damn time. It's about damn time. And look, the positive thing with Lexie Hull, even when she was struggling, was that she was getting in the right positions. Like, you could tell.
That right there is why this Lexie Hull game matters more than one hot box score. Indiana has been waiting for this version of her, and now the question is whether this was one good night or the beginning of something the Fever desperately need at exactly the right time.
She was working her ass off, even when it wasn't working. When it wasn't working, you could still tell that Lexie Hull was doing everything she could to help her team win. She was working her ass off, and it just wasn't working out. She was the Fever's leading scorer early in this game.
And notice what separates this from somebody randomly catching fire from three. Even while Hull's shot disappeared, the effort never really did. She kept cutting, she kept chasing rebounds, she kept putting herself in positions where eventually something had to break her way. That's important because Indiana does not need Hull to suddenly become another star. They already have players who can carry the offensive burden. What they need is somebody who can turn all of those little possessions that normally disappear into extra chances. An offensive rebound here, a deflection there, a cut when everybody is staring at the ball, one open three when the defense overloads somewhere else. But there's another part of this performance that matters even more, and it has nothing to do with her scoring total. We'll get to that because if that part actually sticks, Indiana's rotation suddenly becomes a lot easier to manage.
Getting offensive rebounds. Like, I get it, this was a good shooting game. And if you know anything about Lexie Hull, she just needs a spark. Like, everyone talks about like streaky shooters. There's nobody quite like Lexie Hull, because she goes on 15 game cold streaks and 10 game hot streaks. I've never seen anything like it before.
This is what makes evaluating Hull so frustrating. She isn't necessarily the type of shooter who gives you exactly the same thing every night. The description in this clip is basically the basketball version of a light switch. When she's confident, everything looks easy. When she's cold, that cold stretch can last long enough that you start wondering whether the hot version is coming back at all. And that creates a completely different problem for a coaching staff. A player who shoots a predictable percentage every night is easy to plan around. A streaky player can change a game for you, but you have to survive the stretches where the jumper isn't falling. Indiana's challenge isn't figuring out how to turn Hull into a 20-point scorer. It's figuring out how to make her valuable on the nights when she isn't hitting shots. Because if her entire usefulness depends on the three going in, you're gambling every time she checks into the game.
Lexie Hull. I have never in my life seen a player like Lexie Hull in the way she plays. Because she goes from nuclear hot to ice cold in a flash. And then she goes nuclear hot. And then she'll go ice cold for 10 games. And then she'll go nuclear hot for 15 games. Like, if you've ever looked at Lexie's career,
And that's why one good shooting performance isn't enough to declare anything fixed. The encouraging part is the pattern being described. Hull's better stretches apparently haven't always been isolated explosions. She's capable of stringing productive games together. If Indiana has accidentally hit the beginning of one of those stretches at this point of the season, that could be enormous. Not because Hull suddenly changes the hierarchy of the Fever, but because playoff basketball attacks weak links. Teams spend an entire series figuring out which player they can help off, which defender they can target, and which rotation piece they can force into uncomfortable decisions. If Hull is hitting open shots and competing defensively, that calculation changes. You can't casually abandon her. You can't assume her matchup gives you a possession off. And suddenly the Stars have a little more room to operate.
I also have to give credit to Lexie Hull for what was, for the first time in a long time, a good defensive game. Like, Lexie has been very poor defensively. But even like this season as well, if you look, she had streak of 9, 9, 16, 9. And then didn't have 9 points, and then only had more than 9 points once over the next 12 games. And then she went 10, 14, 10.
Now we're getting to the uncomfortable part. The scoring swings aren't theoretical. The clip lays out exactly how dramatic they've been: 9, 9, 16, 9, followed by a stretch where she barely reached that level, then 10, 14, 10, and immediately after that 0, 2, and 2. That's not normal night-to-night fluctuation. That's volatility. And Indiana has been dealing with the consequences because when a role player becomes that unpredictable offensively, every lineup decision becomes harder. Do you leave her on the floor because you trust the defense and hope the shot arrives? Do you shorten the leash because another player gives you more offense? Do you sacrifice size? Do you change who closes? Those decisions become even more complicated when you're trying to build continuity late in a season. But there's also a danger in overreacting to the bad stretches. If Hull really does operate in these extended waves, benching her immediately after every poor shooting game might make it even harder for her to rediscover rhythm. That's why this next stretch matters. Indiana doesn't need to chase the 14-point performance every night. They need to find out whether the floor of her game can finally become reliable.
Her next games were 0-2-2. And then she's had a 14-point game. She was poor against Liberty, but she had a 9-point game against Dallas. And again, look, she is shooting 50% from over 50% from three. Sorry, no, exactly 50% from three over her last 3 games. She just didn't get any shots because Sophie Cunningham had played most of her minutes against New York. So,
and there's your first sign that the raw scoring number can be misleading. According to the clip, Hull had been shooting 50% from 3 across the previous 3 games, but the volume wasn't there. That is a completely different conversation from a player simply bricking every opportunity. If she's making the look she gets but isn't getting many attempts, then you have to ask why. Is she hesitating? Are the actions not finding her? Is the spacing moving those opportunities somewhere else? Is she spending possessions doing the dirty work while other players dominate the shot distribution? Those questions matter because role players are extremely dependent on context. A star can manufacture 20 shots. Hull isn't going to do that, and she shouldn't. Her offense comes from the ecosystem around her. Transition chances, kickouts, cuts, offensive rebounds, and defensive attention being pulled towards somebody else. That means Indiana doesn't have to redesign the offense for her. The Fever just need Hull to punish the opportunities that naturally appear. And if she can do that consistently, her entire value changes without needing a single extra play called for her.
look, Lexie's contract is an issue for the offseason. It is. What are they going to do with it? Are they going to move on from Lexie? How are they going to figure this out? But, like, that's a problem for the offseason. That's not a problem for today. That's not a...
Then we arrive at the elephant sitting in the background, the contract. The speaker calls Hull's contract an off-season issue, and that's exactly where that discussion belongs for now, because there are really two different evaluations happening. One is whether Hull has developed into the player Indiana hoped it was paying for. The other is whether she can help Indiana win right now. Those aren't automatically the same question. A player can underperform expectations attached to a contract and still have a legitimate role on a competitive team. Fans sometimes blend those conversations together because salary changes expectations. That's understandable. Once money is attached to a player, every bad game feels more expensive. But Indiana can't change yesterday's decision during tonight's game. The useful question right now is much simpler. When Hull steps onto the floor, can those minutes help the Fever? If the answer becomes yes often enough, you deal with the financial evaluation when the season is finished. And this is where the standard for Hull needs to become realistic rather than emotional.
With Lexie is just hope that she plays the rest of the season and she gets in a hot streak at the right time. Because if she gets in a hot streak right before the playoffs, and people saying talking about the FIBA break, Lexie tends to start seasons well, and she was great after the Olympic break. If we get 7 point per game Lexie Hull, that's a positive on defense. Like, that's all you need. Like, you need... Lexie Hull's contract is a terrible contract. But if she at least plays up to the really good role player bill, which is what, like, people have said.
7 points per game and positive defense. Listen to how modest that request actually is. Nobody is asking Hull to hijack the offense. Nobody needs 15 shots. Nobody needs her to become the player opponents build an entire scouting report around. 7 points with dependable defense can be extremely valuable when those 7 points come without disrupting the players who should have the basketball. That's the difference between production and role player production. If your stars create the advantage, a good role player completes it. If the defense collapses, hit the open shot. If somebody drives, move into the open window. If a shot goes up, crash from the weak side when the opportunity is there. If you're defending a dangerous perimeter player, make that player work. That sounds simple until you watch a team lose games because 2 or 3 of those little responsibilities disappear at once. Indiana doesn't need every player to win the game. Sometimes it needs players who stop making the game harder to win. And that brings us to the real payoff from this Hull performance, because the most important version of her isn't necessarily the one scoring 14. It's the version who can stay useful when she scores 6.
At this stage, Yes, obviously. I think there were a lot of people that were kind of hoping Lexie Hull would take a step up after the contract. Not happening. Absolutely not happening in any way. But at the same time, we just need to get 2025 Lexie back. We just need to get 2024 Lexie back, because she doesn't have to, in crunch time, she just needs to be a pet.
There it is, the expectation has changed. Maybe people hoped the new contract would coincide with another major leap. According to the speaker, that leap simply hasn't happened. So instead of continuing to judge Hull against some imagined breakout version, judge her against what Indiana actually needs from that roster spot. Get back to the useful version of Lexie Hull. Defend, run, compete, make the obvious play. That's not lowering the standard to protect her, it's defining the correct standard. Because playoff rotations are full of players whose job description sounds boring until you don't have them. Think about what happens when Indiana's primary creators are being pressured. The defense wants the secondary players making decisions. That's the whole point. Opponents would rather live with Hull getting an open opportunity than allow the Fever's best offensive weapons to dictate every possession. Hull doesn't have to punish that strategy with 20 points. She has to punish it often enough that the opponent hesitates. That hesitation is valuable. One made corner three can change how aggressively a defender helps on the next possession. One hard cut can force somebody to turn their head. One offensive rebound can extend a possession that otherwise dies. Those actions don't dominate highlight packages, but over 40 minutes they alter games.
Best on defense. She doesn't need to be a pass. She doesn't need to guard anybody. Caitlin Clark can do that late in games. She can go and guard late in games. Make layups, shoot 35% from open threes, and crash the board and get a couple of offensive boards a game. And a couple of times, like at least once a game, she goes for an offensive rebound and crashes so hard that the opposing player hits the ball out of bounds instead of coming down to rebound. Like, do that a few times. Genuinely. Do that a couple of times.
And now we get to the part of Hull's game that can survive even when the jumper doesn't. Crash the glass. The clip describes those possessions where she attacks an offensive rebound so aggressively that even if she doesn't secure it, she forces the opponent into knocking the ball out and Indiana keeps possession. That's winning basketball without receiving a statistic for it. And those are exactly the plays Hull needs to make her identity. Because shooting confidence comes and goes. Effort plays are much more controllable. You can't promise yourself that the next three-pointer falls. You can decide you're going to sprint back. You can decide you're going to fight through a screen. You can decide you're going to attack a loose ball. You can decide you're going to make somebody box you out instead of standing outside watching the shot. That's how Hull raises her floor, and raising the floor matters more to Indiana than raising the ceiling. Her ceiling has never really been the problem. We've seen the hot shooting. We've seen what happens when the confidence arrives. The problem is what happens between those stretches. If she can turn the cold shooting nights from damaging performances into neutral or slightly positive ones through defense, rebounding, and movement, Indiana gets a much more dependable player. That's the actual breakthrough to watch for, not whether she shoots 66% from three again, whether she's still helping when she shoots 25%.
Times a game, and just be positive. Like, all the Fever need is for, on any given game, one of Lexie and Sophie to play well. One of Lexie or Sophie to play well. They don't need both of them to play well. You just need one of them. And that's all we are looking for. But yesterday, thank God Lexie Hull stepped up, because she had been all over the place. Like, it was bad. It was really bad.
And this is where the roster construction gives Indiana an interesting safety valve. The Fever don't necessarily need Lexie Hull and Sophie Cunningham producing big offensive nights simultaneously. As the clip argues, if one of them gives Indiana meaningful production on a given night, that may be enough. That's a huge distinction, because now you're not demanding perfect basketball from every rotation player. You're creating multiple paths to the same result. Maybe Sophie has the shot going. Maybe Hull does. Maybe one has a quiet scoring night but gives you something defensively. The important part is avoiding the nightmare scenario where both perimeter options become non-factors and the entire offensive burden collapses onto the same few players. And that is why Hull finding any consistent rhythm right now has leverage beyond her own stat line. It gives the coaching staff choices. If one matchup favors more physicality, you have an option. If another matchup requires shooting, you can ride whoever has rhythm. If somebody gets into foul trouble, the rotation doesn't immediately fall apart. That's what depth actually means. Not having 10 famous names. Having different players capable of solving different problems without the team's level collapsing. And this is also why criticism of Hull earlier in the season wasn't automatically unfair just because she's an easy player to root for.
And I've said this the whole time. I have been as critical on Lexie as anyone. I have been incredibly critical of Lexie Hull. And I think it's been justified in a lot of ways. I think the criticism has been justified. I don't think that I've been overly harsh on Lexie Hull. I think she's been bad. And it's one of those things where it's because Lexie seems like such a good person, it can be hard to criticize.
That is probably the fairest way to frame the entire conversation. You can like the player and still criticize the basketball. Those two things don't conflict. Hull's effort and reputation as a teammate don't erase poor performances, just like a rough stretch doesn't erase the qualities that made Indiana believe in her. The dangerous thing in sports analysis is deciding first whether you like somebody and then changing the standard depending on the answer. If a player you dislike shoots poorly, you call it terrible. If a player you like does the exact same thing, suddenly there are 15 explanations. That's not analysis. Hull's struggles deserved scrutiny because Indiana has expectations and because her role matters. The more meaningful your minutes are, the more meaningful your performance becomes. But criticism also has to move when the evidence moves. If she plays well, say she played well. If the defense improves, acknowledge it. If the shot starts falling, don't pretend it didn't because you spent the previous month criticizing her. And right now the evidence says there are encouraging signs, not proof. Signs, that's the distinction. One performance doesn't erase the inconsistency. But it can be the beginning of a trend, and with a player whose career has apparently featured long hot and cold spells, the beginning of a trend is exactly what Indiana should be watching.
It is happening, and I think it wouldn't be justified because I like Lexie Hull to not criticize her game in a similar way as I would to a player that I probably don't like as much as Lexie Hull. But this is all we need. And again, she's not going to shoot 75% from field and 66% from three. Shoot 45%. You know what? With the shots she takes, shoot 50% from the field and 35% from three on wide opens. Wide opens. And just be a positive defender.
Now we can finally answer what Indiana should actually want from Hull, and it isn't 75% shooting from the field or 66% from three. Those numbers are obviously unsustainable. The clip gives a far more realistic target. Make roughly half the overall shots you're getting, hit around 35% of the open threes, and become a positive defender. I'd simplify it even further. Make teams respect you. That's it. When you're standing open because the defense chose to send extra attention somewhere else, make enough of those shots that the strategy carries a cost. When you're defending, don't become the matchup the opponent spends every possession hunting. When the ball hits the rim, don't assume somebody else will get it. And when the game gets chaotic, use your energy to create something. The irony is that Hull becoming more valuable might require her to stop playing like she has to justify everything with scoring. When a player loses confidence, you can sometimes see the pressure build around every shot. The open three stops feeling like an open three. It starts feeling like a referendum on whether you deserve your minutes. That's brutal for a streaky shooter. But if Hull can anchor her confidence to things besides shooting, then a miss doesn't have to infect the next 5 possessions. Miss the three, fine, get back and defend. Miss the layup, fine, fight for the rebound. Haven't touched the ball in 4 possessions, fine. Cut hard enough to move a defender and create space for somebody else. That's how a role player stays engaged without needing touches. And that's how Indiana can keep her on the floor without constantly wondering which offensive version is going to appear.
That's all you have to be. Don't need to be all WNBA, because I think if we're being honest, I think that might be it. I don't think she's out here going to be the all WNBA. All defense. We don't need that. We just need a solid defender. We need any production. Literally just any production. And even if that production is just work.
And this is the payoff. Hull does not need to become an all-league player. She doesn't even need to become an all-defense selection for this season to turn around. She needs to become trustworthy. That's the word, trustworthy. Can the coaching staff put you on the floor and know roughly what they're getting? Can your teammates drive into traffic knowing you'll be ready if the ball comes out? Can Indiana survive your minutes even when you're not scoring? That's what separates a useful playoff role player from somebody whose minutes become matchup dependent. The postseason magnifies every weakness because teams stop playing generic basketball against you. They study your habits. They know which direction you prefer. They know where you hesitate. They know who they want taking the shot. If Hull is on the floor and opponents decide she's the player they're willing to leave open, she has one job: make that decision uncomfortable. Not impossible. Uncomfortable. Hit the first one, and now the defender thinks about staying closer. Attack the closeout correctly and now the next rotation has to move. Crash the glass and now somebody who wanted to leak out has to find your body. Those little adjustments create opportunities for everyone else. That's why 7 or 8 Hull points can feel more valuable than the number suggests. If those points are coming from the exact shots the defense deliberately conceded, they force the opponent to reconsider its plan. And that's why this performance could matter beyond one game. The exciting possibility isn't that Hull suddenly averages 14 points for the rest of the year. Maybe she does have another extended hot streak. Maybe she doesn't. The important possibility is that this game restores enough confidence for the rest of her game to settle down, because confidence isn't only shooting. A confident player closes out without panicking. A confident player attacks an open lane instead of hesitating. A confident player takes the open 3 instead of pump faking nobody. A confident player makes the simple pass instead of trying to force a highlight because she hasn't scored. If this is the version Indiana gets going forward, the Fever become harder to game plan against without changing anything about who their stars are.
Working your ass off, then so be it. And so be it. Just catch the ball, make layups. That's all we need. That is all we need at this stage. So yeah, Lexie, hopefully this is the start of.
So now Hull gets the opportunity she wanted. The bad stretch happened. The criticism happened. The questions about the contract aren't disappearing and they'll be waiting when the offseason arrives, but none of that has to decide what happens next. For the rest of this season, the assignment is incredibly clear. Don't chase the 14-point game, chase the possession, win enough individual possessions and the scoring will take care of itself. Hit the open shot when it comes, defend without becoming a liability. Get on the floor, attack the offensive glass, make the extra pass, force the opponent to spend energy dealing with you. And if the jumper catches fire on top of all that, then Indiana has found a bonus at exactly the right moment. That's what makes this so interesting. Hull doesn't need some dramatic reinvention. The difference between the version people were frustrated with and the version Indiana can trust might only be a few successful plays per game. One extra offensive rebound. One more made open 3. One possession where she fights through the screen instead of dying on it. One cut that forces the weak side defender to move. Basketball games at this level are decided by margins that small all the time, so I'm not calling this a complete turnaround after one performance. That would be premature, but I'm also not dismissing it. Because when a player has spent weeks searching for confidence, sometimes one game is exactly where the next stretch begins. And if Hull really is the kind of player who runs hot for multiple games once she finds that spark, Indiana could not have picked a better moment for the switch to flip. Now you have to decide what you believe. Was this just one good Lexie Hull game before the inconsistency returns, or did Indiana just get back the dependable role player it has been waiting for? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you think Hull can carry this momentum into the biggest games of the season, like the video and subscribe because we're going to find out very quickly whether this was a flash or the start of something real.